This is a video game.
Oh really? I thought it was a book.
Hey, can you move up the screen? I'm talking here. Anyways, Super Mario Brothers. Come on, everybody knows this game. Super Mario Brothers was ridiculously popular. I mean, you go around jumping on enemies, hitting blocks, eating mushrooms, and rescuing a princess from a dirty old turtle man. A game concept like that shouldn't have worked, and yet it did. From start to finish, Mario Bros was a really great time. But here's the thing, once the game ends, it's over. There's not more you can really do with it. And we kind of miss the experience we had with the game when it's all over, and kind of wish to have that experience again. Yeah, you could just play the game again, but that's not what we're really looking at. We want an experience like we had playing the game for the first time, but newer, having the core elements of what we've played, but in a new context. And on top of that, just adding more to it to make the experience even fresher. Hell, even improving upon the mistakes and errors the original title had. So I think I've figured out how exactly we can do this. I think this is my magnum opus. Sequels. Who doesn't love a good old sequels? I mean, every sequel that comes out is always gonna improve upon what the original titles had. These are bad examples you've just put on screen right now. Please fix that. There we go. Sequels. Who doesn't love sequels? Always improving upon the original titles 94% of the time.
And what about the other 6%?
They get sent away to the burning depth of hell.
Ooh, that sounds fun.
I mean, come on, even the naming conventions of sequels are pretty cool. Like, whose idea was it to add numbers next to it? I mean, out of all the possible options they came up with, they added numbers. I mean, that's pretty cool. But in all seriousness, the idea of a sequel is always going to be charming. I mean, the idea of taking something that's already established and then expanding upon it by improving what made it good in the first place and adding newer things to make it even fresher. Come on, that's gonna be cool. And in the world of video games especially, it's just bound to create fans all around. Video games are made to be filled with endless possibilities in terms of entertaining people. And of course, improving a concept and making it even better, appealing to even more people, that's great. And that's why I love the idea of video game sequels. And generally speaking, most video game sequels turn out pretty alright. I mean, they either stay on par with the original title, or they improve upon that original title. And of course, that's not to say they aren't bad video game sequels. I mean, of course they are. But I think in the general sense, most video game sequels are alright. And that's why I want to talk about them today. See how they evolve over the years, see some of the misfalls they've had, and generally speaking, just celebrate them as a whole and talk about why I enjoy them so much. But of course, I also believe that in order for me to truly understand sequels, I need to immerse myself in them. So that's why I've decided to have the genius plan of making my own sequel. And of course, when I mean by making my own sequel, I mean getting someone else to do it.
So wait, what exactly do you want us to make a sequel on again?
Oh, don't worry about it. You can literally make it on anything you want. And by anything, I mean anything.
So, just to be clear, when you say anything, you mean anything, right? Or am I missing something, or...
I literally just told you, when I say anything, I mean anything.
Okay, cool, I think we got that. So, let's make a sequel.
Come on, I literally couldn't have been more clear than that. Now let's just get this out of the way. Video game sequels back in the day, which by that I mean the early 80s, were not really that good. We were obviously still dealing with the early ages of video games, I mean, a majority of video game companies still didn't really even know how to make video games, and the games that we got were incredibly basic and couldn't really get a sequel. Like, let's be real, a video game like Pong is never ever gonna get a sequel. Okay, bad example, but you see my point. The earliest example I can think of a video game sequel would be the sequel to Donkey Kong, Donkey Kong Jr. That game essentially just expanded on what Donkey Kong did, but the thing is, Donkey Kong was probably one of the most detailed games back at that time, and I guess you could see why that maybe got a sequel as opposed to anything else. But even then, the sequel is just more or less of the same, but it's obvious that they were attempting to do something. It was really with the release of home consoles that we started to see more video game sequels enter the world of video games. The NES was a massive hit and home to some fantastic games like Super Mario Bros., The Legend of Zelda, and Castlevania. And of course, like anything popular, it's bound to be mocked. It's disgusting! Companies soon realized that they could capitalize on the success of their titles and turn them into franchises. But as I said before, not many sequels were made, so by the time these games got sequels, they were a bit of a mixed bag. Don't get me wrong, some of them were really good, but others are kind of questionable. Like the games I just mentioned, for example, they all had sequels and they were quite different from their original titles. Mario Bros 2 was still a platforming game, but now you could play as all characters, but you couldn't kill enemies by jumping on them. Instead, you pick them up and throw vegetables at them. On top of that, all the enemies in this game are completely different from the ones of the original title, plus the art style changed. Legend of Zelda turned into more of an RPG battle type game with a sideways view as opposed to top down. Castlevania 2 was mostly similar to the original title, but it also added RPG elements to the series as well as a day and night mechanic. Now I'm not trying to say these sequels were bad, it's just that they were quite different and they kind of turned off a lot of fans. They didn't have what many people wanted from these games. In fact, to a lot of people, they just felt like completely different games. And now I understand why companies wanted to change these sequels up to make them feel new and fresher than before. But because of this, it kind of makes them lack the magic that made their predecessors so popular. But rest assured, companies realized their errors. And by the time these games had their fourth and third entries, that's when things really started kicking in. Game sequels were now starting to build upon and improve on their predecessors, while at the same time still finding ways to add new things to make the gameplay feel fresh, but never forgetting that original title. And these sequels turn out way more popular and successful, as they retain what made the original title fun, but bringing in new concepts, and in return making these games feel better than the original ones. And especially on consoles like the SNES and the PlayStation 1, they contain some of the greatest games of all time, which just so happen to be sequels, such as Super Mario World and Final Fantasy VII, just to name a few. And by the time we reached the modern era of video games, sequels practically became the norm. Seriously, it's just expected nowadays that once a popular game comes out, that it's bound to get a sequel at some point. And the question nowadays becomes not if it's gonna get a sequel, but instead if it's gonna get a sequel that's better than the previous one. And I'm not gonna lie, whenever I hear a sequel getting announced, I'm always excited to hear it out, because I'm always interested to see what companies are gonna do next to change up that original game. And I think nowadays especially, the announcement of a sequel is way more interesting than the actual sequel that gets released. But still, I love video game sequels. There's just something about that second or third entry in a series that gets to me. Whether it's the fact that it's a continuation of a previous game that I love, or just seeing a game that I love being improved and eventually becoming a better game that I love. I enjoy these things so much. There's just something so cool about seeing a game like the original Super Mario Bros. And seeing how, well, basic and simple it is to play nowadays, just still having a sense of fun and charm to it. And then seeing something like Super Mario Bros. 3 or Super Mario World even, and just how it completely improves upon that original game and builds upon it in so many unique ways, from having better music, better level design, better enemies, a better art style, and a better sense of grand scale and adventure. And even though one game is vastly superior to the original one in every sense of the way, they both contain the same DNA. And it's just cool seeing these two games side by side. Even though one is completely newer, it still contains the same DNA as that original title. In fact, now mentioning Super Mario World brings up the question of what exactly makes a good video game sequel a good video game sequel. Yeah, I've mentioned stuff like improving upon the original thing and yada yada yada, but seriously, I want to actually dive into why exactly a good video game sequel is a good one. And in contrast, even look at some bad ones, just to point out why I think the good ones are better than the bad ones. And I think there's no better way of segueing to the next section than... Hey buddy, come on, anything is your business, do the transition. I mean, when the hell did you start sleeping? I think it's when you started to say sequels. Okay man, just stop messing around and continue editing the video, okay? Jeez, editors, am I right? With all the sequels that are around us in the world, we gotta answer ourselves the major question of what makes a good sequel. So I decided to go on the internet and search what exactly is the first ever sequel. It brought me to a film called The Fall of a Nation. So after watching it, did it help? No. Okay, we might need a better example than that. Empire Strikes Back. Now, if there's ever a sequel that is highly regarded amongst multiple people, then it's definitely Empire Strikes Back. Now, we all know the original Star Wars story. Young boy on a desert planet finds weird droids and a guy with a laser sword and goes on a space adventure to rescue a princess. A weird story for sure, but one that definitely connected to many people. And of course, the sequel pretty much expanded on that. But how exactly though? For starters, the sequel took out everything that people liked about the original Star Wars and added more of it or improved it. For example, everyone liked seeing the weird and creative worlds the characters went up against. So this movie introduces even more weird and strange worlds, each of them being distinct from each other and standing out. On top of that, it also expanded character personalities. Each character had more interesting interactions, interesting character arcs to go through, and the scale of what they were going through was much greater. From the first movie being about saving a princess to essentially saving the whole galaxy, the war aspect of Star Wars was massively increased. Large, gigantic battles took place, the visual effects being better than before, the music even more bombastic than ever, and the main villain of Darth Vader was expanded even more, from being just a generic menacing foe in the original one to being fully expanded with connecting him and Luke Skywalker by of course making him his father. And I think that's an important thing to keep in mind about sequels. They shouldn't just feel like retreads of what we've seen before, but just more of it. I don't think it's wise for game sequels to be just derivative. Now, to an extent, some of my favorite game sequels of all time are just derivative pieces of work, just more of what we liked before. But I think we can all generally agree that a sequel should have more to it than just that. It should have purpose, it should have a reasoning for being what it is. If we really just wanted more of the same thing, we might as well just play the same game again. So to kind of summarize, the best video game sequels are the ones taking what came first and expanding on it in interesting ways, not repeating what came before it, but rather seeing what people liked about the things beforehand and then doing interesting things with those concepts, making something that, well, is different and new, is still familiar. Because if we're doing something too different from the original game, then it really has no business being connected with that original IP in the first place. it might as well just be its own thing. Now, with all of that said, here are some of the few concepts I had in mind that I think all video game sequels should look at. I think all sequels should take these concepts and try to improve upon them if they want to create a better video game sequel. My topics are gameplay, characters, and concept. I think these three things are the most important things a good sequel should look at and try to improve upon from the predecessor. And of course, the most important one out of all of these three things is gameplay.
Oh really? I actually just thought it was buying the game.
Okay, seriously dude, if you're gonna annoy me every time I talk in this video, we're gonna have a serious problem. Now, obviously, gameplay is the most important thing of any video game, and I think that a sequel should just try to improve upon that.
Gosh, you really do like saying the same thing over and over again.
But I'm serious, literally, just taking any of the errors people had with the gameplay beforehand and just fixing them up or just improving them is already gonna make that sequel better than the original title. Along with that, see what people liked about that original gameplay and see what they didn't like. That way you can remove more of what people didn't like and expand on what people liked. That way making the gameplay just more fun and enjoyable. I'm not even kidding. These simple things can already make a sequel better than the original game, as it's practically making what's frankly the most important thing of any game better. The next concept we have on our list is characters. Now of course, in a massively story-driven game, you're gonna need your characters to have to go through some sort of character arc. Now, a character arc shows the growth and progression of a character throughout the course of a game, seeing how they've improved and ultimately have changed for the better, hopefully. And of course, a sequel needs to continue that character arc and progress it in newer ways. Of course, a sequel should always try to change up the character, see them in a new light, but it should never stray away too far of what the character is like before. The progression of the character should still feel natural. But what about games that are not as character driven, such as Nintendo games? Well, I think the characters should stay the same as always, but have the world and environment around them changing, as that juxtaposition makes the characters still stand out and interesting in a sequel. The third and final concept is, well, concept. This essentially means the main story of a game or the main gimmick or whatever. So to summarize, all video game sequels should strive to improve the gameplay and to improve the characters, but at the end of the day, a sequel still needs that thing that makes it stand apart from its predecessor, and that's of course its main concept. It's that thing that makes you wanna get that sequel over the original one, the thing that makes it enjoyable, the thing that makes it the sequel. A game like Super Mario Sunshine is a continuation of Mario 64. Its main gimmick is the flood pack and the ocean aesthetic. That's what makes it unique and stand out. It still retains what made Mario 64 so fun, being the collectibles and the open world and all of that, but it has its own concept that makes it stand out from that game, making new people more interested in it. I believe a sequel should stand on its own and have its own merits. Sure, it can be on the same quality as its predecessor, but I believe a sequel can only truly succeed if it surpasses the original title. Not only does it make fans even more appreciative of it, but it also attracts newer fans into the series. This allows the series overall just to have a bigger impact, and it allows the series to truly become even more successful. Now, with all of that being said, I think you get a clear understanding of why I appreciate these sequels so much. But of course, I have to at least mention the negatives, at least in more depth. I mentioned earlier on that a sequel that sticks too close to the original title can feel a bit homogenized. For some people, that can work, but generally, it misses the mark. I also mentioned that a sequel that strays way too far from the original one can also be just as bad. Now, on the positive note, it's always good for a sequel to be innovative, but a game sequel that is basically unrecognizable from the original product is a bit of a turn off. Fun fact, did you know that Devil May Cry originally started out as a prototype for a new Resident Evil game? But as you know, Devil May Cry and Resident Evil are two completely different gameplay styles. So Capcom on the one hand made the right decision of turning it into a new series. Sure, the Devil May Cry gameplay is fun, and it would still be fun if it was a Resident Evil game, but it doesn't change the fact that this and that are two completely different things. And unfortunately, even to this day, there's still companies out there releasing sequels that completely miss the mark of why people love the original titles. And it's so upsetting to see how these once great games have been ruined by the same people who made those great games. And I think that's why I love sequels that really turn out so good. It just shows how much care companies have, not for their audiences, but also the games they made themselves. Not every sequel is going to be a win, but I think we can all agree that the ones that worked for us truly left an impact. I think with all of that said, oh wait, I forgot. Hey guys, have you finished that sequel yet?
Yeah, about that. We ran into a few delays today and it's taking longer than expected, so your sequel isn't ready yet.
Come on, you're supposed to be finished by now. I mean, it's the end. It's literally the end of the video. What am I supposed to do now?
Maybe you could talk about one of those weird sequels. You know, the ones where it's like sort of a reboot type thing. It's not like exactly a sequel, but it also is a sequel. I keep forgetting the name of it.
Oh wait, do you mean... of course. No video about sequels would be complete without mentioning retro revivals. Now, in case you're wondering, retro revivals and reboots are not the same thing.
I mean, they look kinda similar to me.
I don't care. The general idea is that a reboot is a retelling of an original IP. It changes up the continuity, usually the gameplay style. In fact, the style in general is different, and generally characters and progressions they've had before are all essentially restarted from ground zero. Hell, sometimes even characterization can be different. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about retro revivals, which are different from that. The idea of retro revivals is that it's taking an older established game and modernizing it for a new audience. Usually it's the same continuity as previous entries, but obviously changed a bit, as I said before, considering it's a newer title. Usually game series that have existed for quite a while but have stayed dormant get this treatment. And for a lot of people, they really feel the impact of a retro revival releasing, as often these franchises have stayed away for nearly 2 decades. And during that time, they've obviously built a bit of a reputation as well as new fans and generally gained cult status. So when we see retro revivals on stores, they usually become top sellers. It's so cool just to see how companies rethink about these franchises, seeing how they will modernize it, but also seeing how they can stay respectable to what came before it. A lot of the time, you don't want a retro revival that strays away from what came before it. Sure, maybe it will work in context for modern audiences, but it won't leave the impact that fans have been waiting for. It won't be the game fans have been waiting for. The best retro revivals are the ones that can appeal to fans and stay fresh. And that's not as easy as it sounds. While you may think it's easy, it's not easy. That was a terrible sentence. Crap. Oh crap, I'm still recording. While these games have existed for quite a while, they truly took relevance during the 2010s, and it's all thanks to one specific title, Donkey Kong Country Returns.
Wait, Donkey Kong's Country went missing and now it's returned?
Idiot, it's just a catchy buzzword title they used to market this game.
So wait, it doesn't return then?
Well, I didn't say that. During the 2000s, DK was slowly fading into obscurity. there weren't much games really releasing about him, and the ones that released were all spin-offs or gimmick titles. With DKC returns, it was time for him to get the spotlight in a true mainline DKC title, and to see a new, fresher take on it was just incredible. Those games back then were already considered new and fresh, so something even newer and fresher, well, I mean, just look at this guy. To put it lightly, what this game was able to do with the series is truly incredible, and considering the fact that the guys who did this one weren't even the original creators of Donkey Kong Country is all the more impressive. They took the main elements that people loved about those games, being the graphics, the level design, and of course the movement option, and focused on expanding that. The level designs in DKC can be some of the most crazy ones you'll ever experience in a platformer. Moving platforms, moving enemies, and momentum. Oh, the momentum! Feeling fresher than any Mario game you can ever play. Oh, don't get me started on how the levels are laid out. Seriously, some of the freshest level designs you will ever find in a 2D platformer. And considering this was released on the Wii all the way back in 2010, my gosh, these visuals still impress to this day. Sure, it can be challenging to newcomers of the series, and yes, because it was released on the Wii, it does have an annoying amount of motion control. But to me, these are just slight inconveniences. It doesn't deteriorate from what I think is a really spectacular game that I think hails in comparison to the previous games easily. Some of you may not like it because of how derivative it can feel, but to me, it feels like the right DK game we needed at the time. And to be honest with you, the feelings I have towards DKC Returns are the same ones for any other retro revival that came after it. Sure, they can feel outdated, but to be honest, that's really the point. They're not trying to compete with the new titles, at least not in an obvious way. At the end of the day, they're just there to bring back the feelings of the games from those eras. They're trying to give you a sense of nostalgia, and really, there's nothing wrong with that. For fans of those games back in the day, they get a newfound sense of joy and childhood innocence. And for people who have never played those games before, they get a feeling of satisfaction. And that's just great. Retro revivals are not trying to be the new big thing. At the end of the day, they're just trying to be fun, classic styled games. So, sequels. We've talked about them a lot today, and if you've stuck around throughout the whole video, you already know why. Video game sequels are just great. Hell, sequels in general are just great. Video games are designed to fill us with fun and create endless experiences that we'll never forget. And with sequels, we get to relive those experiences all over again, but now filling ourselves with even new senses of joy and memories. A sequel is the opportunity to create a new thing with an already established IP. Whatever mistakes happened before can be fixed, whatever experiences were flawed can be altered, and whatever things we didn't understand can now be corrected and comprehended. A sequel is just that. It's the opportunity to do more with something, to make it bigger, bolder, and better. We've come a long way from Pong. We've gone to Donkey Kong, to Super Mario Bros, to Mario Bros 2, to Mario Bros 3, to Super Mario World, to Mario Galaxy, to Galaxy 2, all the way to Super Mario Odyssey. And through all of these titles, we've seen evolution. We've seen how one simple core element has evolved to something that while to outsiders may seem different, is really just an evolution of what came before it. Humans in general have the idea to create something new, and while there's nothing wrong with focusing on doing something new, there's also nothing wrong with just evolving something we already know. There's nothing wrong with making that thing better than we knew it back then, and in some cases we become more satisfied just knowing something has been improved. And that's why sequels, I think to most people, are so fun. Call them uninspired, call them unimaginative, call them soulless, call them cheap, call them cash grabs. It doesn't matter. Sure, it's not new, but that's not important. A sequel, I think, has something magical about them. And that's why we all want to experience them. That's why we still, to this day, crave tons of sequels to games from so long ago. There's just a magic to them. With all of that said...
Wait! We finally finished that sequel you've been waiting for.
Finally, yes! Okay, we'll bring it over then. Wait, that's just the editor.
I can't believe you didn't figure it out already. I mean, you said we could make a sequel on anything, so we decided to make a sequel on you.
You actually made a sequel on me? Look, when I said you could do a sequel on anything, I was thinking like media, maybe a book or a song or whatever, but me? A sequel of me?
We made sure he was perfect. I mean, look, he even has his own PlayStation controller.
This is so stupid! Face it, man. I'm the ultimate version of you. Why? Because you wear glasses? I don't believe this! This is dumb. This is idiotic. This is a problem I can deal with in the next video.